Hi folks, welcome to today's video. We are going to be talking about political parties today, and this corresponds with video 3.4. So primarily we're going to be focusing on what the purpose of political parties is. And you have two goals for this video. The first one is to describe how political parties act as something called a linkage institution. And then number two, explain the impact of political parties on the electorate and government. The electorate being the group of people in the country that have the eligibility to vote. So, when we talk about linking people to government, right, remember one key thing that we've talked about is that our ideology guides us to a political party. So, then political parties are really groups, organized groups of people with similar political ideologies and goals. Parties will work to elect candidates to office who will represent those ideologies and accomplish those goals as a result. And one of the things that political parties do is they provide access to participation for the people of the country. As we will see, parties operate semi independently at all levels of government, which really creates many opportunities for involvement. We see political parties emerge after the American Revolution in the aftermath, when we start to see diverging opinions about the structure and power of the new government, and that has only increased over time. Now, when I say that these political parties provide access for involvement, I'm really talking about the fact that a political party is an example of a linkage institution. And a linkage institution is really a channel or a means by which the people are connected with the government. Think of it like a bridge between the people and the government, right? How we can, as citizens, can express our policy desires and goals. Other examples that we will talk about of linkage institutions are elections and interest groups, media. But for this section of the unit, we are focusing on political parties and how they connect us to what the government does. Now, political parties impact voters and policy in quite a few ways. To begin here, I want to talk about the general trend of political parties and identification and their influence. So, over time, we have seen a general downward trend of political parties and their influence on the electorate or voters, the people that can vote in our country. Ultimately, when we're looking at political parties in the United States, it's a little bit different because there's no restrictions on who can become a member. You don't need a membership card. So, political party identification is a little bit harder to measure here in our country versus others. But what we've seen over the last, especially like 30 years or so, is a general downward trend or decline in party influence. And we've also seen then, as you can see from this chart, an increase over time in the number of independents. And we've talked about what that means already in a previous set of notes. So, the reason for this, in terms of what political scientists and pollsters can conclude, is really that we've seen a rise of new media, right? That is increasing the amount of information that people have access to. Political parties have lost power due to laws and rules for elections over time, which we'll talk about when we get to part two of this unit. And honestly, we've also seen in the past, 30 years, past couple of decades, people are just frustrated over gridlock. And we'll talk about what that means too. But people are just frustrated with the lack of accomplishments by political parties in power. We talked about with like generational differences and political socialization. Over time, especially younger generations have become more and more frustrated and distrustful of, I don't think that's a word, I think I just made up a word, but they lack trust in the government. Um, Now, that being said, if you ask most people on the street, they're probably going to identify with a party. However, that has decreased over time. So, the political parties that we see have had to adapt as a result of that general trend. And one of the biggest ways that political parties impact the electorate and policy is they try to mobilize and educate voters. Um, right? Because honestly, as we will see, the whole purpose of political parties is to get people in office. So, party membership and influence, just to reiterate, is declining. Parties are no longer the primary source of information for voters, right? You can get your information from a multitude of different sources now rather than waiting on the official political party. And the number one function of parties is to win elections, right? If you don't win elections, you don't have anyone in office representing those policy goals that we talked about. So ultimately, political parties want people to get out and vote because winning elections is essential for them to implement their party policy when they are in the government. So, party identification is the number one measure for predicting how a person will vote when it comes to election time, which is why parties will try and mobilize voters to get out to the polls or recruit new members in general. Now, with the with the decline in party membership and influence, we've seen a rise of a different phenomenon, and that is called ticket or ballot splitting. And this is where a voter will vote for one party for one office and with another party for other offices, or they will bounce between parties as they're voting, right? So, for example, on election day, they might vote Democratic for the presidency, Republican for a congressional seat. They might vote liberally on a various ballot measure, for instance. So it's kind of like a lack of consistency in voting. And we call that ticket splitting or ballot splitting. And as we kind of mentioned, it's more common now that parties are exerting less influence on voters, right? With more information, more resources, it's easier for people to educate themselves on diverse issues, and there's less pressure almost to, or vote straight on a ticket. And what that means is you vote straight down the line in terms of party or ideology. Now, when we're looking at groups, independents are much more likely to split their ballot, and that should not be surprising because independents don't align themselves with a particular party or ideology. They are more moderate, more in the middle. And I just wanted to show you a visual of what I'm talking about. Democrats, as you can see, are more likely than Republicans to vote straight down the Democratic ticket or the ballot. But independents here, you can see they're more likely to split their ballot when they vote. Now, parties are going to recruit and educate voters in really four main ways. They're going to contact members, and not only contact members, they're going to cold call and try and contact people that aren't in the membership that they feel like could be. And they'll do this through mail, email, text, social media, something called robocalls, right? You'll get text messages randomly, you'll get calls randomly from leaders of the local party, for instance, encouraging you to look up information about the political party or vote on election day for a candidate. They're going to hold voter registration drives, right? Making sure that everyone who is interested in being registered to vote for their party is. So they'll hold those drives to encourage people to register. Members of political parties will also canvass neighborhoods, right? They'll walk around, drop party literature into mailboxes. And what that means is it might be summary of their platform, which we'll talk about in a second. It might be a list of candidates that are running under that particular party. So if you are going to vote straight down the ticket and not split your ballot, you know who to vote for. They'll even hand those out on election day. And then also, this has kind of been a new movement, but driving people to the polls, right? On election day, people will be, on standby from the political parties waiting to drive you to the polls to be able to vote. Uber and Lyft, even in years past, have offered a discount on election day to help people get to the polls to get out and vote. And then finally, parties will also conduct opinion surveys on issues to share with office holders and candidates, right? Because just like it's important for the political party to educate voters on their issues, it's also important for the voters to be heard as well. So candidates and office holders know how to conduct themselves on policies and things, right? It's helpful to know how the voters that they represent how they feel about particular issues and positions on things. So parties will conduct those surveys to gather that data. Now, political parties are also going to be responsible for creating what's called a party platform. And this is where the primary ideology is expressed. A platform itself is really just a written list of beliefs and goals. Um, when we're looking at this, the platform is relatively consistent. However, it is going to be reviewed every 4 years at the party's national convention, which we'll talk about the role of the national convention, the next part of the unit, excuse me. But ultimately, the party leadership is going to discuss the platform, right? See if anything needs to be revised. The platform can be used not only to, spread party ideology, but also to strategize to attract new voters to that party as well, right? If you can diversify your platform to appeal to a different demographic, right, you can gain more voters, which can help you in the election. Parties also recruit candidates and manage campaigns, which again, I'm just going to touch on this because this is going to be primarily what we focus on in part two of this unit. But political parties are going to want candidates who have their own financial resources and a strong established following, right? They want people who can kind of foot the bill a little bit more on their own campaigns, because campaigns, as we will see, are very expensive, and they want that established following, right? It's nice for parties to, back someone that already has some experience, who already has a name behind them, because that increases the likelihood that they will be successful in the election. When we're looking at the role of parties in campaigns, each campaign has staff members that are responsible for holding events and raising money to campaign, right? And this money is going to be used for yard signs, TV ads, all sort of, resources to advertise that particular candidate. Right? Parties will conduct debates and forums between candidates as well. Now, when we're looking at money, we are going to talk about this as well, but the amount of money in campaigns is limited by campaign finance laws. I'm not going to bore you with that right now. You get to learn about campaign finance here in just a little bit. But that is primarily the responsibility of the party running the campaign. And then the campaign and political party is also responsible for the media strategy, right? Identifying based on social media trends, cookies on websites, right? What people see, what advertisements, right? When you click on various websites, what advertisements do you see? How is that dispersed? What is the strategy itself? Now, the political party, I do want to talk about as an organization, just to kind of relate it back to things we've talked about already. So each party has a hierarchical structure dedicated to furthering party goals. It's a hierarchy, right? At the very, very top, you have the national party, then you have the state party, and then down at the bottom, you have the local party. The national party arguably has the most influence, right? Because that's the party that's nominating, things like Congress and the presidency. However, the other levels of party organizations also have quite a bit of influence. Party organizations exist at each level here, and they are semi-independent from one another, right? They all subscribe to the same party platform. However, the national party, doesn't give orders to the state or local. They are kind of operating semi-independently here. So I do have a discussion question for you folks to answer. Make sure that you answer this on your notes. Go ahead and pause the video if you need to, and then come back to it. But how does this structure of the party as an organization reflect the principle of federalism that we just finished talking about last unit? So, like I said, pause if you need to, and then return to the video here. Now, at the national level, if we're going to break it down at the national level a little bit, each party has a national committee. And like I said, this is arguably where the state and local get their cues from. But we see that the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee are going to meet formally every 4 years at that national convention, right? You'll see these abbreviated DNC or the RNC. And we'll talk about how these committees play a role in elections, but just know for right now that they're going to meet to write the platform and to nominate the candidates for office for that particular election year. And at the national structure, there is a national chairperson, and they're the chief strategist and spokesperson for the national party itself. They're kind of the one responsible for like the day-to-day functioning of the political party, paying bills, making sure that all of the things are running smoothly. They're kind of like the manager for each political party. Now, political parties do impact the government and they influence the way the government works at all levels, right? We said that when, through mobilizing voters, through creating the platform, campaigning and recruiting candidates, the whole purpose of a political party is to win an election. And then once the candidates are in office, the political party exerts a large amount of influence, obviously. At the national level, parties construct policy, they pass legislation, and ultimately their goal is now to maintain power once they are in government. So controlling the presidency at the national level is important for political parties because the presidency allows the party in power to appoint justices at the federal level. And just so you know, right, this is important for the political party because those judges will rule on the constitutionality of laws, right? It's really important to have justices who are going to lean toward your ideology a little bit when it comes to interpreting the Constitution and the legislation that your party passes. Maintaining power in Congress and controlling Congress is also important for each political party, right? Each party wants to hold congressional offices and have the majority because that allows members to send funding back to their home states for various projects, for instance. The majority party in the House and in the Senate is responsible for controlling the flow of legislation, right? What bills are actually going to be discussed and debated and hopefully passed. So that's a huge power that comes with controlling Congress. Now, with the rise of ticket splitting and the rise of, independents largely voting for different parties on a ballot, in the past, like 40 years or so, we've really seen a rise in divided government. And this is a term that's going to pop up quite a bit in our course from here on out. Divided government is when one party controls the presidency and another party controls one or both houses of Congress. So, currently right now we are in a divided government. Republicans control the White House, the presidency, right? And yes, the Republicans control one part of Congress, the Senate. However, the Democrats control another part of Congress, the House of Representatives. And that can have a serious impact when it comes to policymaking. The impact of this divided government is something that we call gridlock. Gridlock is really the inability of the government to take action, right? You can imagine if the presidency is one party and Congress is another party, there's going to be quite a bit of disagreement. And laws don't get made if there is that disagreement, right? You can kind of see here the left and the right are both, trying to get to that middle, that compromise, but both are saying you move first, right? It's kind of that gridlock, the inability to move or to get anything accomplished, right? Another way I look at this is, right, the art of compromise, and then both sides are saying no, right? So that is an impact of divided government. Now, in the state and local levels, parties also have an impact in shaping state law. And then again, that kind of mimics or takes cues from the national level policy. And then one thing that we will come back to later in this course is at the state level, political parties in power have a huge responsibility of drawing legislative districts, right? So where members of the House of Representatives actually represent, that is a responsibility of state legislatures. And that is a huge responsibility and can really have an impact in shaping who wins an election and who doesn't. And we call that redistricting. We'll get to it later in this course. All right, guys, so that was a pretty brief rundown of political parties and their structure and function. So remember, your goals are to describe how political parties act as a linkage institution. Remember, it would probably be in your best interest here to define all key terms before you describe. And then number two, explain the impact of political parties on the electorate and the government. So you don't have to list all of them or explain all of them. Give me a couple, right? How do political parties impact the electorate and voters? And how do political parties impact government? Okay, so make sure that you are reaching out if you have any questions, if anything is unclear, and I will talk to you guys soon. See you later.